So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colonel Lars Zetterstrom, and I'm the commander of the Galveston District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And today we're going to give you an update on the status of the Harvey storm event. In addition to that, our plan will be briefed for our drawdown plan for the waters retained within both Addicks and Barker reservoirs. And additionally, we'll just give a quick update for some of the ongoing operations that the Army Corps of Engineers has here across Texas for navigation and some of the FEMA missions that we may be supporting in the future. So we're going to begin with watching a video, and you can see the disclaimer on the screen. This video will be made available after the press conference through our PAO, and they'll give you the information on how you can access it through DVIDs. And then also I'll just kind of summarize. So basically this video is representative of the storm event. It's based off of models and the best data that we had available to produce this video to help describe to the media and the public what has happened and what the drawdown plan will look like, so people can begin understanding what is in store for the people still impacted over the next few weeks. So if we could go ahead and start the video, please. All right, so most of you are aware where the Addicks and Barker dams and reservoirs are located, but if you're not, the Addicks Dam and its reservoirs are located north of I-10 and west of Beltway 8, and the Barker dams and its reservoirs are located south of I-10 and west of Highway 6, and their purpose is to provide flood risk management to lessen the impacts of flood events downstream in the Buffalo Bayou. So water from the Addicks watershed is stored in the Addicks reservoir, and water from the Barker watershed is stored in the Barker reservoir. So what you're going to see now is a day-by-day depiction from the 25th of August until the 18th of September. There's captions for you to reference on some of the key events that transpired during the event. Okay, so last evening, we began the gradual reduction of the outflows of the Addicks and Barker dams and reservoirs into the Buffalo Bayou system. This will be a gradual process that will occur starting last evening, where we were at the around 13,000 cubic feet per second until we reduced down to approximately 4,000 on or about the 15th of September. And so the remainder of this video depicts the models of what we will think in terms of the receding waters that are upstream of the two reservoirs, and then also the receding waters that will begin to ensue based off of our reduced outflows for the people downstream of the dams. So if we go ahead and start the video, please. Okay, so at the end, this depicts the outflows from the structures through the outlets at the approximately 4,000 CFS rate, which based off of prior storm events is within the banks of the Buffalo Bayou itself. I'm going to go and make some additional remarks at this time, and then at the end of the remarks, I'll take questions and provide answers to your questions. So. The Corps of Engineers began a very slow and gradual reduction of releases from the Addicks and Barker dams last night. These reductions will take place from now until the 15th of September approximately. As water is drowned down in the reservoirs, the Corps expect water levels in areas flooded upstream of the reservoirs to recede. Downstream homeowners will also see a very gradual reduction of water elevations as the releases continue to be reduced. However, in the areas that experience if in the area we experience another rainfall event before the reservoirs are empty, higher releases could become necessary again. Therefore, your local emergency management agencies may encourage you to stay out of the flooded areas until the Buffalo Bayous are within its banks. This slowing of releases is prudent because it could prevent potential damages to bridges downstreams along the Buffalo Bayou, as well as the banks of the Buffalo Bayou itself. It will also minimize risk to the water control structures, which ultimately protect the city of Houston and provide flood risk management. After the flows reach an acceptable rate from Barker Dam, the Corps will begin the same process at Addicks Dam, and eventually from both simultaneously at the same time until we achieve the desired outflow rate of a cumulative 4,000 CFS. We are conducting daily coordination meetings with our partners at the local government level to provide the most recent updates so they can make the most informed decisions for the citizens that live in their communities. Public safety is our #1 concern as we work closely with our partners, the City of Houston, Fort Bend County, and Harris County, and the Texas Department of Public Safety, and we will continue to monitor the dams and reservoirs and provide updates through those agencies to the public. The gradual releases also help reduce stress on the outlet works themselves. These structures, which allow the safe controlled release of the water from the reservoirs through the dams, are over 70 years old. And although well maintained, as you may know, we are currently in the process of replacing them with new outlet structures. And so it's important to note that that's the current conditions. So right now, the dam is doing what it was designed to do, storing water and releasing it gradually, a little at a time. But we must continue to monitor these structures and be prudent with their operations. So before we began the replacement process, we also conducted some temporary measures to ensure that the outlet structures would perform as required throughout a potential storm event. Moving into about the timing and amount of releases, the Corps is managing the timing and the amount of releases using our water control manual as its guide. The Water Control Manual is a document that was created jointly between the Army Corps of Engineers and Harris County in anticipation of future storm events. But as many of you probably know, this was an unexpected, unparalleled level event. More than a trillion gallons of water fell over the greater Houston area. And we have retained over 140 billion gallons of water at the peak of the retained pool of water behind both reservoirs. So this manual provided us the guidance on standard emergency operations and the management of the projects themselves throughout this storm event. Looking forward, once we are complete with the flood crisis, the Corps will turn its attention back to the repairs of the Addicks and Barker Dam outlet structures. We are currently conducting a feasibility study. We have proposed a feasibility study, and our non-federal sponsor, the Harris County Flood Control District, has signed a letter of intent stating their desire to conduct a feasibility study jointly with regarding to these projects. So because these dams reduce and mitigate flooding for more than 1.4 million people that reside within the Buffalo Bayou watershed, we must ensure the public is aware of the conditions and understand that there is inherent risk with any structure that you live and operate nearby. Moving to some other support activities beyond the focus on the Addicks and Barker dams and reservoirs, now that we're beginning to draw down the retained water. Under the National Response Framework, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is assigned the primary agency for Emergency Support Function Number 3, Public Works and Engineering. The Corps assists the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA by coordinating federal public works and engineering-related support, as well as providing technical assistance and engineering expertise and construction management to prevent, prepare, and respond to and/or recover from domestic incidents. So basically, if a local government agency requests support through their state to FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers may be assigned tasks to be able to assist the state and local governments recover from this storm event. Moving into navigation updates. We live on America's energy coast. We have more than 1,000 miles of federal channels that are maintained by the Galveston District. We have the most number of ports that are maintained by the Corps of any district in the nation. And we have the greatest amount of tonnage that is navigated through these ports and channels that we maintain. So throughout this storm, which is moved from Corpus Christi east through the coastal region of Texas, we have been sending survey vessels and also have mobilized dredging equipment necessary to bring back these critical ports to full operation for the state of Texas and the nation because of the critical energy production and imports and exportation of goods through this state. We recognize the importance of the navigation industry and the huge impact on the national economy, where waterborne traffic carrying cargo ranging from crude oil to cotton relies heavily on these coastal waterways. So as we continue to focus on reducing flood risk in the Houston area, we are also postured to constantly at work to set conditions which will allow the vital marine arteries to reopen by conducting these surveys and mobilizing these dredging contractors to get these waterways and ports back to full operational capacity. But we're not alone. The Galveston District, with our partners, including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Coast Guard, Texas Pilots Association, and the brownwater industry, have been actively participating in our navigation restoration coordination calls to ensure that we could most expeditiously bring these ports back to full operation. So this team of federal, state, and local partners is diligently performing this work to be able to identify the hazards to navigation and recover the channels and ports as rapidly as possible. That completes my remarks. I appreciate your time, and I'll take any questions that you may have at this time. Thank you.
On the west side of Houston, where they're under mandatory evacuations, how will this draw down where you're lessening the water that's coming through the Buffalo Bayou?
So on the west side of Houston, so downstream of the structures?
Yeah, it's like South Jerry Ashford near Briar Patch.
Right. So in the region downstream of the Addicks and Barker Dam, so roughly south of I-10 and east of Highway 6, what our models and our plan indicate and what the video represented is that as we're gradually reducing those outflows, you'll see the gradual recession of the waters that are currently inundating those regions. As stated, we're contacting and coordinating with our local governmental officials daily, and they'll then have the information they need to properly inform and guide the public as they move back into their homes, assess the damages, and begin returning to normalcy.
So do you think it's a week, 2 weeks? Is there any?
So it's going to continue between now until approximately the 15th of September. The longer we go, the smaller that pool of water that's outside the banks of the Buffalo Bayou, the closer it will be. And so we can watch the video again if it will help represent, but that's the main purpose of this video, is to show that receding of water downstream of the dams.
Does the video, is the model based on average rainfall between now and the 15th, or no rainfall?
It's based off of the forecasted rainfall, which is currently within the next 7-day period, less than an inch of rain. So again, highly conditionalize this. This plan is based on our current known conditions and data. There are variables, and the most significant of which would be future rainfall that could be pooled within the reservoirs of the two dam structures. Yes, sir.
And you also said the outflow last night was 13,000?
So we began the reduction of outflows last evening. It began at 3,000, and it's going to gradually step down to around 4,000 on or about the 15th of September.
And what was the peak outflow?
So we achieved 13,000, slightly over 13,000 was the peak that we've achieved. And so we've maintained that outflow rate since we reached those peak surcharges in order to ensure that we achieved the greatest capacity within the dam structures to minimize the flows of water that went around the ends of the dam, and that did occur, as well as to ensure that we were releasing the maximum amount of water for that capacity and minimize the stress to the structures themselves.
Those structures, you're concerned about the bridges, the sides of the banks of the
So,
bayou.
right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the condition of those, and are we under any threat that they could go?
I can't speak to the condition because they're currently underwater, and that's part of the reason that we'll reduce the flow slowly. So the local governments, organizations, with possibly some assistance from the Corps, can go in and inspect them and make sure that they're still safe. If you reduce it too quickly, it would put undue stress on those bridge structures downstream, as well as a quick reduction of the outflows could potentially cause erosion at more than excessive rate that could be experienced from the water itself, and that's called sloughing. And we're attempting to prevent that from happening, and it reduce the impacts downstream than what they've currently experienced.
Does anyone have to worry about going over bridges or anything, or it's not a problem?
In terms of driving over them?
Yeah,
I'm sure that the bridges that are closed, the local government makes the decisions about the operations of the bridges, so I really can't comment directly on it.
You started
I think
releasing.
you
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Said that after this is over, y'all gonna be inspecting the dams. Y'all gonna do that to make them, reinforce them? Can you explain a little bit about after,
Yes, sir. So, yeah, so our structures are also currently underwater. So once we have emptied the pool of water retained behind the dams and the reservoirs, that will allow us to actually go into the outlet structures, inspect them to ensure that there was no damage caused by the extremely high rate of outflows that went through the structures. And then we'll, once the construction site can be remobilized, the contractor will begin continuing that construction project to replace the outlet structures, which was scheduled. It should now potentially be completed in 2021. And so it's a good point, because these structures that have provided flood risk management to the Houston area since World War II will continue to need to do so for the generations to come. And so, that's the current plan, is until 2021, roughly, the existing outlet structures will continue to be utilized in future events. And then the new structures will be where the outflows are released from in the future. And just, I want to remind everybody that this is an unparalleled weather event, bigger than any that we've ever seen here in certainly the Houston area. More than a year's worth of rain fell over several days, excuse me. And prior to this, the next largest event was last year's tax day flood. So we've never seen the level of rainfall and never actually pooled water and retained it within the reservoirs to this extent. Prior to this event, the maximum we had seen was last year's tax day event. We had water that had gone off of the land that the government owns, but we had never inundated anyone's homes prior to this year in the more than 70 years of these structures' operations.
Do you feel comfortable, y'all started last Sunday, the slow release?
No, last evening, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
We've maintained the outflow rate at the approximately 13,000 cubic feet per second since we reached that level. And it was last evening that we began the process of very gradually reducing the outflows. That should be complete on the 15th of September, given no changes to the plan due to rainfall or other variables.
I guess with this, with the procedures that y'all followed, do you feel like that helped save some other homes? Because you're always going to have people who are going to say, my home never flooded, but now with the release that, it is.
So we're reducing the releases. So we haven't increased the releases since we achieved that 13,000. We're now in the process of reduces lessening, and that means that any water that is currently downstream of the dams, it too is going to start flowing back into the banks of the Buffalo Bayou. So what's starting right now is the relief that I hope everyone in the public has been looking for.
But if you hadn't done anything, let's say.
If we hadn't done anything, so you can look at it this way. More than 1 trillion gallons of water fell over the greater Houston area. We have retained more than 140 billion gallons of water in the reservoirs. And so if we had not retained that water, that would have been an additional contribution. So, it's within that 1 trillion. That extra 140 billion would have gone through, the city of Houston, through the watershed, and caused even more significant damages than, unfortunately, what was caused by this unparalleled weather event. Yes, sir.
The construction project that's now on hold because of the inundation, is that changing or assuming that there will be future events of this size, since you just said the last one was last year, and it seems to be happening more frequently in the area
Right.
due to maybe, you know.
So
climate change?
the capacity of the releases of the outlet structures will remain the current maximum capacity than we have today, according to the current design, which is around 16,000 cubic feet per second. So we never achieved the maximum outflow that we could have. The bottom line is it right now is just replacing the existing structures that is older infrastructure and replacing it with new infrastructure that should last into the future to continue to mitigate risk in flooding in the city of Houston in the future.
Excuse me, we have folks that are listening in, so if you could take your name and affiliation before you ask your question, please.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm Luke Abafi with Engineering News Record magazine, and what was the original construction completion date or estimated completion?
So these projects were constructed during World War II and completed in the late 40s, early 50s.
And the construction that's ongoing now you say the estimated completion is 2021.
Yes.
What was it before?
It was in 2020.
Okay.
So-
Push a year.
And this would be for the dams around, what are you
Yeah.
actually working on?
So we're actually replacing the outlet structures that these releases have flowed through since we had to begin the surcharge releases. That means that heightened level of release. Ordinarily, we only would release around 2,000 cubic feet per second. We have the ability to increase to 4,000 outflows during the rainfall events that we experienced prior to this. So again, this unparalleled amount of rainfall was the condition that we had to account for to ensure that we did not exceed the capacity of the reservoirs and have even more uncontrolled flows of water around the ends of the dam. So we had approximately 4,500 CFS go around the north end of Addicks Dam. So that was part of the consideration. Also needing to build the capacity as well as needing to mitigate impacts to the outlet structures themselves.
When you say the outlet structures, is that the dam? Is that releasing?
Can you go back to the very first video? So the dams are earthen levees. So they're 12 and 13 mile earthen levees comprise the dam. The dam is what retains the water that's pooled in the reservoirs. The outlets basically picture concrete structures lined with steel pipes with gates that can be raised and lowered. And the gates is what controls the outflow rate through the outlets. That's a good question. I know that, engineers assume that, people know this, but that's hopefully a clear depiction of what these structures are.
So in addition to the 13,000 through the outlet, an additional 4,000 went around the back of Addicks. What about Barker? Was there any additional?
No, we had no other uncontrolled flow of water around any of the other three ends of the dams.
And it was in the north end of the
Yes.
Addicks?
And
Yeah.
that is the way these structures were designed. But obviously, when they were built during World War II, there was no urbanization in the area that the water would flow around.
In my understanding, the west side really got hit because there are more homes on the west side? Is that why we're all?
When you
talking
say
about
west side here,
Yeah, the west side.
so
There are more
they,
homes
well, I don't know if there's more homes, but it was based off of the volume of water that was retained in the reservoirs. They lived within that area, ma'am.
Scott from ENR again. Talking about the ports and the channels, can you talk about how they were impacted and what percentage were inoperable and where you're at
Right.
right now with the?
So the best way I would describe it is that because where Harvey hit landfall, just east of Corpus Christi, the majority of the impacts have been to the ports from Corpus Christi to the border of the state of Louisiana. The ports further to the west, down to Brownsville, actually were temporarily closed, but they received no impacts. We go through a process of once the sea states and the weather allow us and the amount of material that's in the water allows us to survey them and to penetrate through the material, we then can determine what the depth of the bottom of the channel is. And then we provide that information to the Coast Guard and the Pilots Association, and then they make decisions about how much they need to restrict the depth of the channel. So every channel on the coast, there's 28 ports in Texas, and there's 6 deep draft federal channels. Each of them have an authorized depth that the Corps of Engineers is responsible for maintaining them to. And we're trying to bring them back to that authorized depth as expeditiously as possible.
So are they all, I mean, how many of them are open?
So the only ports that are still currently closed in Texas are the ports of Port Arthur, the Port of Beaumont, and Port Orange, all of which are on the Sabine-Neches waterway, which is still being impacted by high flows coming down the Sabine and Neches rivers. So as soon as those flows reduce, it's safe for vessel navigation from the flow of the water. We'll begin surveying those waterways and begin providing that information to the Coast Guard and to the pilots so they can, the captains of the ports can make the decisions again to reopen them. But of the 25 ports, 28 ports in Texas, 25 of them are currently open, some of them with restrictions. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Yes, and those of you who would like to